So, you've probably heard the terms HDD and SSD thrown around, especially when you're looking at a new laptop or computer. Let's break it down. Think of a hard disk drive, or HDD, as the old, reliable workhorse of computer storage. It's been around for decades, storing everything from your operating system to your family photos. An HDD is a mechanical device. It's got moving parts inside, like a tiny record player. It's been the standard for a very long time because it can hold a massive amount of data for a relatively low price. You can get hard drives with terabytes and terabytes of space without breaking the bank, which has always been their biggest selling point. On the other side, you have the solid-state drive, or SSD. This is the newer, faster technology. An SSD has no moving parts at all. It's completely silent. Instead of a spinning disk, it uses a type of memory called flash memory, similar to what you'd find in a USB stick or your smartphone. This fundamental difference is what makes all the difference in performance. SSDs entered the scene as a premium option, much more expensive for less storage. But over the years, that has changed dramatically. They are now the go-to choice for anyone who values speed and responsiveness in their computer, and their prices have become much more accessible for everyone. The history of these two is pretty interesting. The HDD has its roots way back in the 1950s. The first one was huge, the size of 2 refrigerators, and it could only store a few megabytes of data. Over the years, engineers made them smaller and smaller while cramming in more and more storage. They became the standard for personal computers in the 80s and 90s. For a long time, if you had a computer, you had a hard disk drive inside it. It was the only real option for storing all your software and files. Their evolution has been a masterclass in engineering, but they are still based on that original spinning platter concept. Solid-state drives, while feeling very modern, have a history that also goes back a few decades, but they didn't become a practical option for most people until much more recently. The underlying flash memory technology needed time to mature and become affordable. In the early 2000s, SSDs were incredibly expensive and offered very little storage, so they were mostly used in very specific, high-end enterprise situations. It wasn't until around the late 2000s and early 2010s that they started appearing in consumer laptops. Apple's MacBook Air was one of the first mainstream devices to really push SSDs, and since then, their popularity has just exploded. Let's get into how these things actually work. Inside an HDD, you have one or more flat circular disks called platters. These platters are coated with a magnetic material, and they spin incredibly fast, usually at 5,400 or 7,200 revolutions per minute. There's a small arm, called a read-write head, that moves back and forth across these spinning platters, a lot like the needle on a vinyl record player. To find a piece of data, the arm has to physically move to the right track on the platter and then wait for the right section of the disk to spin underneath it. This physical movement takes time, even if it's just milliseconds. This mechanical nature is both the HDD's strength and its biggest weakness. The technology is mature, which means it's cheap to manufacture. That's why you can buy a massive 8 terabyte HDD for a reasonable price. However, because it has moving parts, it's more fragile. If you drop a laptop with an HDD while it's running, the read-write head can crash into the platter and damage it, potentially causing you to lose all your data. They also use more power to keep those platters spinning and generate more heat and noise. You can often hear a faint whirring or clicking sound from a computer that is using an HDD for its tasks. Now, let's look at the SSD. It's a completely different world inside. There are no moving parts. Zero. Instead, an SSD is essentially a grid of memory chips, all connected to a controller. When your computer wants to save or read a file, the controller instantly finds the location of the data on these chips and accesses it electronically. There's no waiting for a disk to spin up or for a mechanical arm to move into position. It's all done at the speed of electricity. This is why it's called a solid-state drive. There are no moving or liquid or gaseous parts. It's just solid electronics doing all the work. This solid-state design gives SSDs some huge advantages. Because there are no moving parts, they are far more durable. You can shake a laptop with an SSD or even drop it, and the drive itself is much less likely to be damaged. They are also completely silent in operation and use significantly less power, which is a big deal for laptops because it means you get better battery life. The main trade-off has always been cost per gigabyte, but as technology has improved, SSDs have become much cheaper, making them a viable and often superior choice for almost every user, not just professionals with big budgets. The core reason SSDs are so much faster than HDDs comes down to how they find data. We call this access time. With an HDD, finding a file is a physical process. Imagine you have a massive library, and you need to find a specific sentence in a specific book. The HDD is like a librarian who has to walk to the right shelf, pull out the right book, and then flip through the pages to find the sentence. All of that walking and page flipping takes time. For a hard drive, the walking is the read-write head moving, and the page flipping is the platter spinning. It's fast for a mechanical object, but it's still limited by physics. This delay, known as latency, is especially noticeable when you're trying to access lots of small files at once. For example, when your computer boots up, it needs to read thousands of small files to load the operating system and your startup programs. With an HDD, the read-write head has to frantically jump all over the platter to find each of these little files. This is what causes that long wait time when you turn your computer on. Each tiny movement of the head adds up, resulting in a boot process that can take a minute or even longer. The same thing happens when you open a large application like Photoshop or a video game. An SSD, on the other hand, handles this completely differently. Using that same library analogy, an SSD is like having a magical librarian who knows exactly where every sentence is and can teleport directly to it. There's no walking, no flipping through pages. When your computer asks for a file, the SSD's controller knows the exact address of the data in its memory chips and can retrieve it almost instantly. This is because accessing data electronically is thousands of times faster than accessing it mechanically. The access time for an SSD is measured in microseconds, while for an HDD, it's measured in milliseconds. This near-instant access transforms the user experience. Booting up your computer becomes a matter of seconds, not minutes. With an SSD, you press the power button, and by the time you've sat down properly, you're at your desktop, ready to go. Opening applications feels snappy and immediate. Double-click an icon, and the program just opens. Copying files, especially large ones, is also dramatically faster. An SSD can read and write data continuously at a very high speed, whereas an HDD's speed can be limited by how fast its platters can spin and the head can move. So, why does all this speed matter in the real world? It's not just about numbers on a benchmark test. It's about how your computer to use every day. The single biggest upgrade you can make to an older computer to make it feel brand new is to swap its old HDD for an SSD. The difference is night and day. Everything becomes more responsive. Clicking on a file doesn't result in a pause, it just opens. Web browsers launch instantly, and even navigating between many open tabs feels smoother because the browser can quickly access cached files stored on the drive. It removes the bottlenecks that make a computer feel slow. Let's take a couple of simple examples. We already talked about booting up. A typical HDD might take 60 to 90 seconds to get you to a usable desktop. A modern SSD can do the same job in 10 to 15 seconds. That's time you save every single day. Or consider copying a large video file, say 10 gigabytes. On an HDD, you might be watching that progress bar slowly crawl for a few minutes. On a decent SSD, that same file transfer could be finished in under 30 seconds. This makes a huge difference for content creators, gamers, or anyone who regularly works with large files. For gamers, An SSD is almost essential now. Modern games have huge, detailed worlds and high-resolution textures. When you're moving through a game world, the game is constantly loading new areas and assets from your storage drive. With an HDD, this can lead to stuttering or long loading screens between levels. An SSD can feed that data to the processor and graphics card so quickly that loading screens become drastically shorter, or in some cases, are almost eliminated entirely. This creates a much more seamless and immersive gaming experience, which is why new consoles like the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X come with ultra-fast SSDs as standard. Ultimately, the reason most people now choose SSDs is that the user experience they provide is just so much better. While HDDs still offer unbeatable value for mass storage, like backing up photos and videos, the primary drive that runs your operating system and applications should really be an SSD. Prices have come down so much that the performance gain is well worth the investment. The speed, responsiveness, durability, and efficiency of SSDs have left traditional hard drives in the dust for almost every primary use case. The era of waiting for your computer is over, and the SSD is the technology that made it happen.